Hey everyone, welcome back to CK Cycles. Well, it's fork rebuild day for my 99 Yamaha Vmax 1200. I already have the left fork rebuilt and it is looking good and the new seal seems to be working. When I originally got this bike, as you remember, it was in an accident and I was concerned that perhaps the inner fork tubes here may have been bent just a little bit. Quite a bit of fork fluid was coming out from around the seals, and I didn't know if that was simply due to old original seals or if the tube was slightly bent, so that it would not fully seal in some of its stroke, and thus it leaked quite a bit. So not only am I inspecting the inner fork tubes here to make sure they're not bent too badly, they're not serviceable, but I'm also replacing the main seal and the dust cap. So I've already got the left one done, but the right one is over on my bench, and let me show you how I rebuild it. So this is the right front fork, and overall it looks pretty good. I did not find a bent inner tube on the left fork when I inspected it, so I'm hoping that the right inner tube here is not bent, but we'll find out. First thing I'm going to do is to kind of clean up the grease and the grime off of the fork. The forks were leaking quite badly, and the fluid collected down here on the lower outer tube, and that collected dirt and grime. So I'm going to go out and scrub this up in the parts washer, then come back and start to get it disassembled. I apologize, but at this point my video lost audio. I'm still getting used to my wireless mic setup and forgot to turn my receiver on. Here I'm just releasing any possible air pressure that may be built up inside the fork through the Schrader valve. Afterwards, I remove the top cap with my electric impact. These top caps have a very fine thread. Sometimes they can be difficult to get out. Spacer tube gets removed. A washer should come out, and then also the main spring. There's the washer. Main spring with the tight coils towards the top. Have to remember to put it back like that on reinstallation. From here I'm just draining the fork oil out of the fork itself. Oil's looking a little old, so I'm happy to be rebuilding these forks and getting some fresh oil in them. I'll try and pump the fork here a little bit just to help get as much oil out as possible. Next, I'll try to remove the internal piston. I am trying to engage the hex bolt here in the bottom of the fork. I think it's a 10mm hex, and I have it loosened, which is good. I need to find a way, though, to hold the piston on the inside of the inner tube so that the piston itself does not spin as I try and loosen the hex bolt. I found that this little pine stick here worked perfectly, as I could jam it into the top of the piston and hold it while I fully remove the bolt. I'll try and kind of show what that looks like here a little bit further down in the video. There's the bolt, and there should be a brass or a copper washer in there as well. I'll have to dig that out. There it is. And now the piston can be removed. Piston needs to be removed so that the inner fork tube can be removed and the seals replaced. There's the piston, and there's the stick I used to jam down in to hold it. They do make an actual specific tool that is made to hold that piston in place. I don't have the tool, and so I thought I would try and see if the stick would work, and it did work. Here I am removing the dust cover, exposing the retaining clip and the fork seal. The retaining clip fits into a channel inside the outer fork tube, and I need to pry it out of that channel so that then I can remove the inner fork tube and seal. After the retaining clip had been removed, the fork pops right apart. At this point, I'm going to check the roundness of the fork. Now, I know I am doing this on a planed wooden surface. It's not a metal machined surface. It's not clamping the fork, in a lathe with a dial gauge to check the run out or anything. I'm just rolling it here on my flat table just to see if there's any major bends or anything in the fork, and there wasn't. So like the left fork, I think this one is going to be good for rebuild, and I think that it's going to be serviceable for the use I'm going to put it through. Here I am applying just a little bit of grease to the new fork seal to help with installation. The washer, the new fork seal, and the inner tube must all go together as one unit into the lower fork tube. Making sure I have the seal the correct direction. And install. I do not have the proper tool to fully seat the fork seal into the outer fork tube. So instead I use the old fork seal just kind of as a dampener, and then I use a punch and a hammer to fully seat the seal past the groove in the outer fork tube that the clip fits into. In this process, I had to be very careful that I did not damage the inner fork tube or the outer fork tube with my hammer or my punch as I worked to seat the new seal fully. Time to install the retaining clip, which I seated the best I could by hand, and then I used the old seal once again to be able to pound and send the retaining clip home into its channel. And here it is, fully seated. It is now time to install the piston. I made sure that the small spring was on the bottom of the piston, and then I installed it here with my super fancy pine stick that I used to fully seat the piston and then hold it in place while I drove home the retaining bolt. I had to be sure I did not forget the sealing washer here. After installing the piston, I installed a new dust cover over the seal. Used a little oil here to make sure that it would seat easily. And it was a simple push-in installation. I then filled the fork with some new fork oil. I believe it was 20.9 ounces of fork oil. I then actuated the fork several times to make sure that the oil fully seeped in around the piston and the lower fork unit. After this, I verified my fork level using my caliper here, measuring down from the top of the inner fork tube to my oil level, which I think is about 4.8 inches. Feeling good about my fork oil level, I reinstalled the main spring, making sure that the tighter coils were up towards the top. Then installed the washer. And then the spacer tube. I decided this needed to be wiped off first, as it was quite cruddy and dirty before installation. The manual recommended that grease be applied to the top cap. As I think I stated before, these are very fine threads. I do not want them to be stripped, so grease it is. Here I use the socket and I push down hard and then try to turn the socket in small increments to get the cap to seat onto the threads. If it feels good and it doesn't feel like I'm cross-threading anything, I drive it home. I will then use just a couple of hits with my electric impact to make sure that the cap is fully seated. After the top cap is fully installed, I work the fork up and down several times. I'm mainly checking just to see how it feels, that the springs feel good, the fluid feels good, and to make sure there's no fork oil coming out of my seal or leaking from the piston retaining bolt. Here everything felt good. It's time to get it installed on the bike. So once again, I apologize for losing audio on my video. Fork rebuilding can be a pretty intimidating process, but here on the Vmax it seemed pretty straightforward. I'm going to move on now to reinstallation of the wheel, replacing the throttle cable, and generally starting to get controls back installed on the bike. This is Chris for CK Cycles. We'll see you later.